First of all, thank you for coming, and thanks to Garage, to Katya and Nastya particularly for inviting me. Really appreciate that. And the participants. And the structure of this event, it's going to be like a vinyl record. We're going to have an A-side, and then we're going to turn it over, and we're going to have a B-side. And in the A-side, we have two presentations. And I will say straight away that I, as Katya said, I am not an academic, I'm not an historian. I'm a musician and I'm a storyteller, and I'm here actually to learn, not to teach. And there may be people here in the audience who know more about this subject than I do or we do. And we want to hear from you, so at the end there is going to be an opportunity to ask questions or to make a contribution. So please do that, because if you do that, I've got some rather beautiful presents here, which I will be awarding to the people that I see as deserving of them. They're not forbidden. So the exhibition, Bone Music, can I just check how many people have seen it already? Okay, so it's an exhibition about a particular time in Russian history, which, you know, I was very excited and inspired to find out about. It's about a time of underground record production and distribution. And when I started to investigate it, why did people make these strange records? Of course, the reason was that they made them because they had to, because the music, a lot of the music that was on these records was not available for various reasons. Sometimes commercial, but usually for ideological reasons. It was music that was forbidden, often. So this is an extraordinary, interesting, for me, Russian story, your story. But is it a bit of history? Yes, kind of. But also, no. This is a story which is still happening. It's not just a story about the 1940s and 50s and 60s, because there are plenty of places in the world where music now is forbidden, where music is censored, where musicians and artists are repressed. And we're going to begin this evening, this event, with one of our participants, Magnus Ag, from the organization Freemuse. I assume you've read Magnus's biography, but you'll understand what Freemuse is, an organization dedicated to representing and raising awareness of musicians and artists who are being censored and forbidden and repressed right now. So we thought we would begin now, in the present. After Magnus, we're going to have two more presentations from some other very special guests, one of whom's come a long way to talk about that. So let us begin. Magnus, are you ready? Yes. So would you please welcome to this event on Tabooed Music at Garage from Freemuse, Magnus Ag.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Stephen, and to the whole X-Ray Audio Project for bringing us here, and Garage for setting this stage for what I hope will be a really interesting evening, discussing some of these topics about censorship and the arts going back historically, and then, as Stephen mentioned, looking at the contemporary scene. And my first intervention here is going to be, what do we see now? And before I get too much into the work we do, I want to start with one guy. This guy, Mehdi Rajabian, and his brother, Hossein Rajabian. Mehdi plays the sitar, as you can see there. He's from Iran. His brother's also from Iran. He's a filmmaker. Together they created this platform online to distribute music called Berg Music. So a clear parallel, of course, to the exhibition that is outside. Back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, you did it on X-rays. If you do it now, you do it on the web, of course, if there's something that is limited you want to distribute anyways. as you can imagine, this is not very controversial music. It's like playing the sitar is a historic Iranian instrument. It's not that they're saying down with the regime, that they're very like politically aggressive. They just wanted to share this kind of music. Hossein also did a film. He's a film director. One of the things they facilitated was also women voices, that in Iran is restricted. And in music, on stages, you're not allowed to perform solo as a woman in different parts of Iran. And there's a lot of restrictions. And these guys created this simple digital platform where you could share some of this music. And then this picture from last year, when they both reported to Evin prison, probably the most notorious prison in Iran. They had been arrested back in 2013 by the Revolutionary Guard, held in solitary confinement. Mehdi was allegedly tortured. And then in 2015, they were convicted to 6 years in prison, later reduced to 3 years in prison, but still, and with a hefty fine. And the charge was insulting the sacred and propaganda against the state, simply for playing and distributing this kind of music, and also a bit about the films that Hossein made. We work in human rights, so there's a lot of sad stories. This is actually one that, for now, is at a reasonably good stage. We campaigned a lot, and they just a couple of months ago, they were out. They were released on a technical detail, so there's an appeal now, so they're not cleared of the charges, but they're at least not in this notorious prison anymore. Mehdi, this is a cartoon of his sitar, and then how he gets energy from that is kind of in treatment, because he's chronically ill, and being in a harsh prison is not a good thing, and the Iranian authorities denied him to go to the hospital regularly, so he's in a fairly bad medical condition, but still a lot better to be out and be able to go to the hospital than not. That's kind of just to set the scene of some of the people and artists we work with. And as Stephen said, FreeMuse that I work for is a human rights organization. We say we advocate and defend the right to artistic freedom of expression worldwide. So we use the human rights declarations and international law that protects freedom of expression and thereby also artistic freedom to argue with governments that they shouldn't restrict the arts, depending on how they do it. How we do that is, as like most international organizations do and national organizations, we do a lot of research, try to figure out what has happened, what is the case, what happened to the artist, what new law is in progress that might restrict expression somewhere, and why is that in violation of international law, or is it? Like, there's also sometimes where it's not, but it takes a lot of research, as you can imagine. Then we campaign. Classic format is, of course, as in Iran, get this artist out of jail. Some of it is more long-term and more structural, trying to change laws or trying to change a UN procedure or get a foot in the door with an EU agency that might negotiate a trade deal with someone and then make sure artistic freedom is in the conversation. But I want to, and then the third pillar is kind of network, and why I'm really pleased that Garage is hosting this is we wouldn't be able to do this without being engaged with all kind of actors, of course a lot of artists, but the artistic community, all the music lovers that come to an exhibition like this, all the people interested in the arts one way or another, or in justice for that matter. We are in daily contact. We get notified about violations via a big network. We then, if we campaign, we also rely on people around the world to join us and amplify the voices of the artist that is imprisoned. So that's kind of the networking part. But I want to, since this is primarily about music, we cover all the outcomes, I want to go through a bit of our research from the past year on what kind of cases we've seen with music in addition to this one in Iran. And, I forgot one thing. Just to give you an idea of kind of the artists that we work with, different kind of art forms. I have this short video from a conference, and one of the way we build our network is, of course, to gather people here or in other conferences. And this video will kind of give you a taste of the wonderful artists that we work with from all over the world. Thank you.
All that is banned is desired.
I was stopped over there, my car was blocked.
Louis Vuitton sued me because of the bag in the drawing.
They were kidnapped and taken to the victors.
The old food company wanted to stop that story from reach out.
They can torture you, they can kill you.
There's a censorship practiced by the state whenever you go anywhere.
My work was withdrawn last minute.
I spent 11 years in the jail.
For the first time, there's been a gathering like this. We're bringing together 50 artists from around the world. They've suffered enormously for their work. There are people who've been in exile, they've had death threats. In order to carry on their work, they've overcome these obstacles and kept on going. It's an extraordinary tribute to their creativeness.
That's what's so great about this conference. You see all these brave people who've risked everything.
Events like this are creating networks that can support even better.
By expressing ourselves is how the world will change.
The most dangerous thing is silence. When there's no conflict, when nobody is put in jail, it means that the human spirit is dead.
So that's just a quick teaser of some of the people and issues we work on. And now I'm going to focus a bit more on 2016. Every year we give out this report where we kind of try to do a global overview of the situation. So I have some data and some cases from 16 that I want to present to you. And then go back to, at the end, kind of more what is the solution part. Not that I'm claiming to be able to solve it all, but try to look at some of the ways forward. This is a campaign we did for Tibetan artists, Tibetan musicians in particular, imprisoned in China. Playing fairly simple songs about Tibet and the Dalai Lama, not like aggressively, not inciting to violence, just songs about Tibet and how they like the Tibetan culture. But from the Chinese perspective, that's obviously not so well seen. And these guys are convicted from between 3.5 to 9 years in prison. One of them was actually just released, but after serving a 4-year full-time sentence. So it's pretty tough. And then it's pretty hard from a human rights perspective to get this kind of information, to figure out what's happening to these guys. But as we speak, there are several Tibetan musicians imprisoned in China. And what they're often charged with is this kind of ridiculous charge, seduciously splitting the state. And sorry to the translator, I don't even know how to translate seduciously, but kind of with an evil intention to split the state. And this is, as if you hear some of this music or the translation of it, it is literally just singing about the nice mountains of Tibet and stuff like that. It's very, very harmless. Another guy I wanted to mention is Kutsal İvsemen. He's a Turkish musician. In 2016, he played at like a small concert, like at a festival or like a square or something. He played this song where he sang about a baby donkey. And in Turkish, a baby donkey is kind of a mild form of an insult, like calling someone a fool or something. He was later then charged with insulting President Erdogan. But the funny part was that he was never singing about the president. Like, he didn't mention the president, he didn't mention the name of the president, he sang about a baby donkey. So what you actually had was the court interpreting that there was some kind of link between a donkey and the president, not the artist himself. He was slapped with like 10 or 11 months in jail, but not that he had to serve it. He's just a reduced sentence, so he's out now. And then I also just want to mention this one, and this is actually from 2017, so not part of the stats from last year, but in Mali, some of you might have followed that. There's a great, wonderful music tradition in Mali. One of the most amazing music festivals I've never been, but I've read and seen pictures from is the Festival of Desert in the northern part in Timbuktu. Strong musical culture for generations, and a lot of like Western music originates from Mali or has like links to it. But Islamic instruments that you saw in like 2012 came in and kind of swept the northern part of Mali, banned all music. And what happened here just earlier this year was that They had hoped they could finally do this exhibition again. It's been in exile, as they call it, since 2012. They've been smart in traveling with it, but sadly not been able to host it there in the desert. But they were really trying to do it this year, and then there was a big suicide attack nearby, and the authorities simply said, we can't guarantee the safety here, sorry, we'll have to cancel it again. And the reason why I also mentioned this is that there's a wonderful film on the program here, the public program. I think it's on Sunday. They'll have to kill us first, about this whole music scene and the festival in particular, and some wonderful, great music. So I only encourage you to go see that here on, I think on Sunday, yeah. When you add all of this up, as we do every year, you get these numbers. So this is for 2016. We saw 3 killings. We saw 2 artists abducted, 17 attacked, 84 artists imprisoned, 43 prosecutions, 40 persecutions or threats, and 840 acts of censorship. It's a lot of different cases, and this is all art forms. This is not just music. If you break it up a little different, you'll see here, and sorry it's a little small, there's a lot of cases, but you'll see music here, and all the way to the left, dance, then film, then literature, then multiple art forms if people perform more than one, music, theater, and visual arts. And as you'll see, film was the most targeted art form, and that's because there's tremendous amount of censorship in film, and there's like these long blacklists of film that are banned in different countries, and we cover every film that is banned. If you publish a list, every film counts as one act of censorship. It's one piece of art being censored, so that's why you see film so high. The other colors are what we call severe violations, and there you see music is actually the art form that is hardest hit. And this is, I just want to say, this is the cases we know of. This is not like the world is it's probably worse, and it might not be exactly like this. We are limited, we're a small organization. We're doing our best to verify and only include cases we can verify, and in parts of the world that's of course very tricky. Just wanted to mention one of the films that were banned in 2016 is this The Weekend by a British director. It was banned in Italy, not by the government, but it happens to be that the Catholic Church owns most of the cinemas in Italy, more than 1,000. And they didn't like that there was like homosexual content and some drug use in the film, so they banned it. And you can technically see it if you go to one of the 10 independent cinemas or something like that in Italy. But this kind of religious motivation for banning it is something we see many places. And oh yeah, here's the official reason, but I just went through that. Another way of looking at these numbers is, of course, dividing them into countries. And first, I want to look at the censored ones, so the 840 over there. If you put that out on a map, you get the top violators here. And let me just read it to you, because it can be a little hard to see. On top of the list, we had Ukraine, then we had Kuwait, then we had China, then we had Egypt, then we have India, then we have Russia, then we have Turkey, then we have the US, then we had Pakistan, then we had Iran. And this is kind of, in a way, an arbitrary list, because censorship is so hard to quantify, and it happens so many places where we don't find it. But the reason why some countries make it up are these blacklists that I mentioned before, and Ukraine is an obvious example. I don't think they've been on our list before, but last year they banned more than 500 Russian films and TV shows. And we count everyone. And because, to the credit of the Ukrainian government, they're transparent. They publish the list. Many governments will not tell you what they're banning, but a small step in the way is at least to be transparent about it. And Kuwait and Ukraine were both like that. So there's long lists of names and titles that are banned, and that's why they end up in our stats. Looking at the other, like what I call the severe violations, so all the colored dots, not the gray one. If you put that on a map, you get this picture, and with Iran on top with 30 violations, Turkey with 23, Egypt with 18, Nigeria with 15, Russia with 10. And again, we use the cliche tip of the iceberg, because you will see like North Korea is not on there, Saudi Arabia is not on there, and it's not to say there's no violations happening in those countries. It's to say that we don't know of them. We try to verify, but we only include cases that we can verify, and that's of course very difficult. How am I doing on time? Okay. And just wanted to mention one case from Russia from last year also. I don't know if you saw that, but Jesus Christ Superstar was to be performed in Omsk, but an Orthodox group put pressure on the city council and the mayor to ban it, and it ended up with it not being performed. It's a little murky exactly who made the decision, if it was the rector or the city council. But that's another example that it happens in all parts of the world, including here in Russia. And looking maybe forward, what was the claim of the group was that it was continuously blasphemy. There's a long history with Jesus Christ Superstar, of course. But looking to this year, one of the cases we're concerned of from Copenhagen, where we are placed, is of course Kirill from Gagol and his current imprisonment, and we're calling on the government to be proportionate, be just, and argue that this needs to be very clear that this has nothing to do with artistic freedom. And we of course have contacts in the artistic community here, and we can have our doubts. But that's a quick run through of some of the cases we've seen, some of the things we're worried about. And then briefly before I end, I just want to touch on potential ways forward. How do we see it? And two in particular. I'm going to start off with a bit of a funny question just to see if anyone knows this. Who does China's President Xi Jinping look like? Anyone has any ideas? It's a fairly broad question, but there's one here. Excellent. You see this? And this is kind of to make the point that censorship is sometimes counterproductive, right? This is over the summer, there's been in this Chinese blogosphere some comparison, and it goes back longer, but it took time, got renewed energy over the summer. And then you compare Xi Jinping going next to Obama, then you have one of the other characters from Winnie the Pooh going next to him. And there's just this funny comment in the Chinese blogosphere as a way to get around the censorship. They're not supposed to talk about the leaders. And their reaction was then to ban images of Winnie the Pooh and wording, like the name Winnie the Pooh from. So if you're inside the Great Firewall of China, that is limited. And I think some of the way forward is, of course, to focus on this counterproductive element of censorship. It becomes more interested. I would have never heard of it. I'm pretty sure you would have never heard of it if it wasn't been censored. It became a bigger story because of that. Of course, there's Chinese people that won't see this and can't talk about it freely. But we, at least as outsiders, can share this and laugh at it in this incident. But it's sad, and often it's more deeper, more meaningful artistic productions than Winnie the Pooh that is facing this kind of censorship. But it's also indicates a way forward that is to raise the cost of government. The reason why the Chinese government is doing this is, of course, not to have that story. They think it's more efficient to ban the name Winnie the Pooh or the picture than actually take that discussion about whether the president looks like him or not. And I think we as an artistic and rights-focused community can kind of help make that cost higher, confront the Chinese. Why are you banning this? Share it on social media, and when we go into the arts, share the song, play the song when artists are imprisoned. That's a simple way, so governments just in this cost-benefit analysis, it becomes more expensive for them to censor or to ban or to imprison artists. Another thing that I think is important in this struggle is solidarity among the artist community. And to round up, I want to return to a quote from the two Iranian artists, the Rajabian brothers I mentioned in the beginning. While they were still in prison, they got this letter smuggled out of jail where this is a quote from. And I just want to read from it. And this was while they were on hunger strike in an Iranian prison. We urge all artists from around the world to show their protest and criticism against all of this in a peaceful way worthy of an artist. Stand by our side and don't forget us, because being forgotten is a human's greatest pain. And I think that's a very important other element of our work is this. You need the solidarity. Being imprisoned is a scary experience, or being even censored is a scary experience. And I think the artistic community and all of us as music lovers, art lovers, can really play our part in showing that when these things happen, we can show solidarity, send a letter, share their song. Listen, a lot of it is great art. It's a good excuse to listen to it or engage with it, look at it, go to the exhibition if it's censored or it's banned. And I think I'm probably gonna end there in that you see all these governments and other people of power, non-state actors, trying to like force one dominant narrative. And when that happens, I think we need to stand up, because any healthy society needs alternative creative expressions. You're never satisfied with one. You don't want one version of the world. You always need that alternative, and that is a healthy society. And I think great for Stephen and the X-Ray Audio Project to bring us together. I have this conversation. We have some historic knowledge now of what happened in the past, and there's some clear parallels to what's happening around the world today. And I will look forward to continue this conversation. I'm part of the panel at the end, but I don't know if I have time for a few questions. Yes. Just if anyone has any immediate questions, let me know now. Otherwise, I'll also be part of the panel on the B side.
So, in the statistics of censorship, how do you separate cases when there is some showing of drugs or explosives? These things can also be censored while being dangerous, but we approve of this often because this is dangerous. How do you separate these cases from censorship which is not constructive? Censorships are by law and by human norms, and censorship which is arbitrary. How do you separate it?
Yeah, that's a very good and very relevant question, and something we spend a lot of time on, obviously, to make this distinction, because under international law, and we are human rights organizations, there are certain restrictions that you're allowed to put, if, like incitement to violence, for example, you can restrict that, and hate crimes or hate speech, you can restrict that. But what is really important is that it's necessary, it's proportionate, it's transparent, and it's enforced by the rule of law. So every time you have an authority that kind of arbitrarily dictates, we don't like that piece, or that is dangerous, like you can't have the police go in and say that at an artistic venue. You can have a court of, like a rule of law process where you have a court making the decision, and then you can have an appeal process. So what we weigh in on these censorship cases is when that doesn't happen. When someone in a powerful position just dictates, I don't like that, or we don't want that piece of information. It can be with the argument that it's dangerous for children or for society. But if it's the children argument, we say you can do an age classification. That's totally legitimate, and it's encouraged even by the Special Rapporteur on Cultural Rights to do age classification boards where you have representatives from the artistic community. You might have someone from a government position too. Evaluate, is this film appropriate to show to a minor, yes or no? And then you can put a label on the film or the poster saying, yes, you should be over 15 years old to see that. But there's a huge difference between that and then banning the film completely. Like, adults should be able to make their own decision, even if there's drugs in it, even if there's some violence in it, if they want to see it or not. And you can be open about what the content is so people don't get experiences they don't want, but I don't think it's the government's role to dictate to adults that they shouldn't even be allowed to see it. The adults should make their own decision, and there should be advice for children so they don't end up seeing things that are not good for them. I hope that answered some of your question. I think we're going to continue to have this talk the rest of the night, because it's a very important one. So thank you for the question.
Okay, Magnus, thank you very much.
Thank you.
A few months ago, maybe actually 6 or 7 months ago, I came across an article, possibly because of Magnus, I can't remember, but it was about an amazing project to distribute information, cultural information, into North Korea. And obviously North Korea is very much in the news, certainly in the UK, all the time at the moment. This was an extraordinary project because it was a project to try and change things through music and film in North Korea. Very strangely indeed, a few days later, somebody contacted me and said that she had read about our project, X-ray audio project, Bone Music, and wanted to be in touch to see if there was a way to collaborate. And this was Sharon Stratton from an organization called the North Korean Strategic Center. And in fact, they were the very organization that had organized this project that I'd read about. So we've been debating and in conversation for since then. So I'm very, very pleased that we have representatives of the North Korean Strategic Center here with us who've come to tell us something about their work in regard to that country and to culture and music. And I think that we are going to begin. Are we ready, Nastya? For Mr. Kang? So originally, Mr. Kang, who founded the organization, is that right, Peter? He was a North Korean defector who suffered very badly in North Korea, but escaped and founded the North Korean Strategic Center. Originally, he was going to come at the invitation of Garage to be with us, but let's say for security reasons, let's put it that way, he was advised not to come. He's not here with us in the flesh, in the room, but he is going to join us by the wonder of modern technology, I think by Skype. He's going to be here, and I think he's going to tell us his story. And after that, Mr. Peter Lee from the same organization is going to talk more about their work. Okay, so in that case, I will introduce, first of all, Mr. Peter Lee from the North Korean Strategic Alliance. Maybe you'll take it from here, Peter, okay? Okay. Great.
Good to see you. My name is Peter Lee. I'm a Chief Executive Officer of the North Korea Strategic and U.S. branches. And actually, this is Mr. Kang Chol-wan. He's a founder of our organization 10 years ago in South Korea. But he is originally from North Korea. He defected 25 years ago. He was imprisoned into one of the notorious North Korean gulag because his grandfather was accused of enemies of states when he was consumed some portions of alcohol. He said some words about North Korean founder. He lost his mother and his fathers, and a lot of his families there. And he was imprisoned there when he was just 10 years old. And he spent 10 years there, and then he was finally released when he was 20 years old. And then he began to, he secured a small radio in late 90s, and this is a window to the outside world. He can listen to outside information and music, and he developed hopes for the future and hopes for the freedom, and eventually he committed himself and he crossed the Yalu River, which is between China and North Korea, and then finally he made to the South Korea in early 90s. Since then, he became the freedom fighters. He was the first North Korean defectors who was invited into White House by President Bush 12 years ago. And since then, he founded North Korea Strategic Center, and then we have been sending tens of thousands of USBs and small radios into the North Korea so that other North Korean people, they can also have freedom, for the hope of freedom. So let me introduce Mr. Kang Chol-wan, and he's going to briefly share his personal story. 강 대표님, 들리세요?
네, 잘 들립니다.
네, 대표님. 여기 인사 한번 해주시면
Can you hear me? Yes. So let's welcome our guests. There are a lot of them.
한번 이렇게 해주시면 좋을 것 같아요.
너무 만나뵙게 돼서 너무 반갑고요.
I'm very glad to see you all here.
죄송스럽고 미안합니다.
I'm sorry for not being able to come.
네, 말씀해 주십시오 계속. 예, 대표님.
제가 쭉 그냥 얘기하면 되는 거예요?
네, 그 북한에서 이게
Please continue. Can I speak further? Yes, please. The translation is on, so do continue speaking.
저는 그 러시아에 한 번도 가본 적이 없고 특히 이제
I have never visited Russia.
모스크바나 저기 상트페테르부르크는 이제 북한에 있을 때부터 많이 들어봤던 도시이기 때문에 언젠가는 한번 꼭 가고 싶습니다.
But I have always wished to visit Moscow or St. Petersburg at least once, Russia in general.
함께 나누게 돼서 너무나 영광이고 또 이 자리를 만들어 주셔가지고 너무 감사드립니다.
The sound is very bad. It's impossible to translate from the Korean original.
정치범으로 숙청이 되면서 약 한 10년간 북한의 강제 수용소에
My grandfather
수감돼서
was arrested
짐승 같은 그런 인간의 생활을 했습니다.
and held more than 10 years in inhumane conditions. And when I escaped into the outer world, I recognized that in Stalin's age in Siberia, there used to be similar camps in Siberia, and there was this great person in Russia, Solzhenitsyn, who, during Soviet times, spent many years in such a concentration camp, and I was able to feel myself personally. I compared what was happening in Siberia, in the Soviet Union, and in North Korea. I was able to relate to this. Comparing Stalin's periods with North Korea, I understand that the Soviet Union is the past, but North Korea is the present. But now the system looks much like Stalin's system did.
I just told him slow down so that she can translate. Sentence by sentence. 한 문장씩 해주세요. 네.
그래서 이제 그런 수용소가 아직도 북한 내부에 존재하고 있다는 게
These camps still exist in the North Korea, and that's something that causes me pain all the time. In a concentration camp in the North Korea, they still use torture, they use violence against the prisoners, and people are on the verge of death. And there are more than 300 such places. Each month, these people in camps suffer horrible atrocities and torture. In such death camps, as I still remember this vividly, and it shakes me every time to remember, now I'm living in decent conditions, but right now many people are suffering. They are made to endure these atrocities, and I'm thinking about this constantly. When I escaped, fortunately I was able to obtain a radio, and through this radio I heard KBS for the first time, the radio station. It was autumn, and this was my first experience with a different country, with the outside world. It was a completely new experience for me. And for me, a person who had witnessed only the North Korean politics, it was a shock. Using this radio, I was able to have an opposing opinion to what I was taught at school when they told me that the war in Korea was due to American machinations. And so through this radio, or thanks to this radio, I was able to take part in the movement that transferred news from South Korea to North. And that's why I was persecuted by the northern government, and they made me escape, defect to the south. I defected in the 90s, and now I'm a resident of the South Korea, and now I'm able to tell the whole world about the persecutions that are happening in North Korea. Thanks to my friend with whom I have worked for all this time, we were able to inform the whole world about tortures and violence used in North Korean camps. Now, I am an advocate for human rights in North Korea, and it's through radio that, and through the ITD scheme, we're able to transfer news to northern citizens. The North Korean government has threatened to kill me. They wrote me messages in blood, wrote my name in blood and threatened to kill me. Such threats mean that the North Korean government is so afraid of the information that we transfer to its citizens that they resort to these. The international community has still not resolved the issue of nuclear disarmament of North Korea. And I believe that this is a failure of the big politics. But still, I believe that there is another reason for this. The reason is that freedoms and rights of North Korean citizens are so brutally violated. And very recently, a person who we know as Kim Jong-un has begun transmitting threats of nuclear warfare. And if you listen to the defectors, you can understand that persecution and torture has become even more violent in this country. They make people stand up before a crowd and gouge out their eyes. They shoot hands and feet first. As you know, Kim Jong-il
김정은이 잡아서 처형을 하는데 그 비행기를 쏘는 이제 그 중화기, 그러니까 고사기란 총을 걸어놓고 이제 사람을 쏴 죽이는데 이게 고사기란 총 한 대.
Kim Jong-il used to execute many people by firing squad.
두 사람에게 쏴서 시체를 완전히 없애버리는 방식으로 이제 처형을.
They shot down planes. They shot individual people, assassinated them. And now the elites of North Korea in the contemporary cultural landscape performs things that are unthinkable in our time. And the crimes that they perpetrate are way above all other atrocities in the world. The nuclear experiments show us that Kim Jong-un does just what he wants because he can. The situation, the strategy, this all had to be considered, but we can say that the current regime does not follow the example of the previous regime. Kim Jong-un doesn't follow his father's example, he just does what he wants, never considering the strategy in general. And even China and Russia, the countries that he wants to influence through his policy, are now part of this crisis. Recently, President Moon of South Korea had talks with President Putin and asked him to stop oil supplies, fuel supplies from Russia to North Korea. If both China and Russia stop supplying fuel to North Korea, I think the Kim Jong-un regime will face extreme problems in finalizing its policies. So now North Korea tries to pressure other countries. And I think that the current situation is the watershed moment. The international community does not pay enough attention to North Korean policy. The Western Europe, the Eastern Europe, the former Soviet Union, if many people in those countries are familiar with this information on North Korea, I think a new era will begin in the situation around North Korea. And if at least China and Russia change their policies towards North Korea, this will bring about tremendous changes. In the past, the Soviet Union were famous and well known around the world, and even now, the North Koreans sing Russian songs just the way here in the South they sing pop hits. And in the future, Russia may be able to spearhead this process of change around North Korea. And I would like to wish Russia to become of help to support this process. And lastly, I would like to say that I will continue fighting for human rights in North Korea. And of course, I have to suffer inconveniences. I am not able to travel abroad, and I regret not being able to meet you directly. I would like to apologize for this once more. And that's all from me. That's my short story. If you have any questions, I will be glad to answer them. What music is now listened to? What music do they listen to in North Korea? Do they have lyrical songs, gentle songs, or is it just propaganda, all in all?
일단은 이제 북한에서 초보라는 노래는 한국 노래를 제일
In North Korea, South Korean songs are banned, as well as American pop music. When it comes to classical music, academics are allowed to listen to it, music scholars are allowed to listen to it, but simple people, ordinary people, are prohibited from studying it. They may hear some classical music, and some of them can really experience a lot of it. But Southern Korean songs, old folk songs, these are still available. For example, the songs from the 70s are already forbidden. American pop music, as I've said. Russian music is, however, available, because it was believed that the Soviet Union and North Korea follow the same ideological concepts. For example, Million of Scarlet Roses is a very famous Russian song from the 80s, was sung in North Korea. It was a hit. It is familiar to everyone in North Korea. We might say that in North Korea they are quite enthusiastic about Russian music, Russian songs, not the newest songs, but older ones. Yes, they are widely known. Does prohibited music come to North Korea by any way? Such music is usually listened to through radio, or they use USB flash drives. We make such thumb drives for North Korea and send them over. And so people are of different ages, and so they want to listen to different things. Those who compose those mixtapes, they are 20 to 30, and we're trying to guess what their age group wants to listen to in North Korea, and so we make such compilations. Even broadcasting through radio is much problematic right now, and now we use USBs first and foremost.
And what about musicians and artists themselves in North Korea? Could you ask Mr. Kang, Peter, if they themselves are very restricted in what they can produce, musicians and artists?
지금 대표님 북한에 있는
North Korean musicians cannot write songs as they wish. I mean, there is a censorship division from the Workers' Party, and they follow the whole process. And when somebody composes music, a song, it has to pass several stages of censorship before it gets heard by ordinary people. For example, among North Korean songs, there are a lot of songs glorifying Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il, and once they said, try finding songs without these names. Or try writing songs without these names. This was a kind of a directive. And so they began composing songs that did not mention the party leaders. But even this was not voluntary. It was made under the direction, the personal direction of the rulers. So there is no artistic freedom at all. Everything is strictly censored. And ordinary people are almost unable to find anything prohibited to listen to. How do they distribute? How do you distribute those USB drives to people in the north? Well, it's hard to list all these particular methods, and if we mention them here, then the security organs in North Korea will learn about this, so I'm not going to give you details. But to put it briefly, the border between North Korea and China is at least a bit transparent. There are cities where some exchange is possible. We can do it also through Russia, through Vladivostok or Khabarovsk. The Chinese city of Xinei is also a gateway. So these are the cities where we're able to smuggle the USBs into North Korea. There are several ways of doing this. Mostly we do it through markets. Outside the topic of music, you have mentioned that you would urge Russia and China to stop supplying fuel to North Korea. How much of this fuel goes for military purposes? Wouldn't stopping supplies threaten the lives of ordinary people? Wouldn't this make the humanitarian situation even worse? Currently, most of this fuel comes from China by two ways, free and for money. The free supply is about 500,000 tons, and everything else is sold for money. And after the UN's urgings, they have cut this supply by 50%, and if it stops completely, then the only channel would be by buying it for actual money. And so the UN is trying to stop China from these free supplies. But currently, much fuel comes through Russia, and some of it goes for civilian purposes as well, but mostly this is something which is used for military purposes. And I believe that it's very hard to distinguish the purpose when you are supplying fuel. Of course, some hardship is going to be added to the situation of the ordinary people due to lack of fuel. But I believe that it's worth to pressure these big countries to stop free supplies of fuel. If China and Russia stop these supplies, at least for a short period, I believe that this can bring about great changes in policies. And maybe a lot of people will not endure long suffering, but will be able to live this life of suffering peacefully and quickly. Fuel supply, if it's not stopped, will remain the only way to somehow influence the North Korean nuclear armament situation. It's a peaceful way to change North Korea's policies, and I believe that this peaceful method is worth trying. Unfortunately, we're short on time, so we have to stop this part of our conference, to wrap up this part of our conference. I was very happy to see you here, and I dream of coming to Russia at least once and seeing you in person. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kang. We really appreciate that, an amazingly poignant story. I'm not quite sure what to say after that. But I'm going to introduce Peter, and he can say it instead. So would you please welcome to our second guest in the room to Tabooed Music from the North Korean Strategic Center to talk about their work, specifically about their work with culture and the USB sticks. Would you welcome Mr. Peter Lee?
Thank you. This is actually a film. Russian people who dreamed of for free music. They used in back in 40s and 60s. And my presentation, actually, can you show my presentation? So I'm going to show how this small USB can actually change the world. So from X-ray to USB, how ordinary people's desire for freedom actually changed the world. This is bone music, so Russians' creative inventions in 20th century. And today I'm gonna speak three topics: current military tension in Korean Peninsula. Very brief. I understand this is cultural events, not political or human rights events. And then second topic is about solutions for North Korean issue, which Mr. Kang has already covered. So I'm gonna just briefly fast forward. And then lastly, I'm gonna spend some more times of my speaking on what we do to help people in North Korea currently. So I'm gonna show the music, actual music, which is recorded in July 2017 from North Korea, which says by a group Moranbong Band, which is one of the most popular band in North Korea. The name of the song is Dear Comrade Kim Jong-un. Here's subtitle. Sorry, but my time is limited. I'm gonna go next slide. Yeah, I know you're enjoying. The next one is it's named like a group Tiara, which is a South Korean a girl group, which is recorded August 2017. The name of the song is So Crazy. Well, I guess video is not so okay, but you can tell this is kind of a South Korean pop culture. So actually these girls, they sing for themselves, not for their leader. So next one, I'm gonna go to the next one. So what made these differences in the same people between the North and the South? I personally think that 3 generations of Kim dynasty in the North actually made the differences. This is 3rd generation of North Korean dynasty. Mr. Kim Jong-un is now doing. This is what he's doing now. Actually, this is from the August 28th of this year. They launched the intercontinental ballistic missile, which can touch the base of west coast of the United States. And their continued nuclear programs and ICBM missile tests has created serious insecurity threats and instabilities in the region. This is from Russian.
Has successfully carried out a hydrogen bomb test, the country's state television has announced. It came after an earthquake measuring around 6 on the Richter scale was detected in the country. It took place in the northeastern province bordering China and Russia and was felt too in both of those countries. RT's Kate Partridge.
Actually, they tested between China and Russia.
10 News military reporter
This is the United States response.
with their call to action. Hey, Hannah.
Hey, and tests reveal U.S. soil may soon be within striking distance. And if you take a look, the West Coast is, of course, their closest shot. Now, if that happens, we do have a last line of defense.
Some troops are being briefed. Others are doing drills.
The kill vehicle is right there towards the top.
So some military stuff. And then finally, of course, Mr. Trump. He threatens war on North Korea constantly for the last couple of months.
North Korea best not make any more threats to the United States. They will be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen. He has been very threatening beyond a normal statement. And as I said, they will be met with fire, fury, and frankly, power, the likes of which this world has never seen before.
Fire and fury. This is a kind of a not easy word. Is North Korea intimidating the Cold War, imitating the Cold War superpowers? Yeah, is North Korea crazy or smart? So this is this 1 minute clip gonna briefly touch the 50 years of history of Korean Peninsula. If it plays.
North Korea is a bit of a black box, right? It's got this rogue nuclear program. It's under heavy international sanctions. There's gulags, there's famines. The people appear to worship this deified kid of a national leader. To understand why that is, you really have to go back to 1910 when Japan first colonized Korea. And Japan at the time was its own super crazy fascist imperial state, which Americans know about because we fought a war with them. Japan wanted to convince Koreans that they were a subset of the Japanese race and to rally them to the imperial cause. And then Japan collapsed in 1945, the North came under Soviet occupation, but the ideology stayed there. So we think of North Korea as like this last holdover of Soviet-style communism, but actually it's the last holdover of Japanese fascism. And you still see that today. North Koreans are told that they are the purest race on earth and that their superiority means that they need a strong leader to protect them from the outside world. And then they have this leader who's kind of deified because he's a holdover from the Japanese emperor who was actually, a quasi-religious figure. So then in 1991, the Soviet Union collapses. Stop giving North Korea all these subsidies, and the North Korean government needed to find a new way to keep its citizens support because they were so poor that they could not feed their own people, and 1 in 10 North Koreans starved to death. So that's when Kim Jong-il, who was the leader at the time, came up with the Sungun policy, military first, which is this big lie they tell the country that they're constantly at this low boil war with the entire outside world, especially the American imperialist dogs, so you have to give up everything towards the military cause. It's really effective. Everybody buys into it. There are studies that show that even North Koreans who leave the country and see how poor North Korea is, most of them actually come back willingly. When Kim Jong-il died, there were millions of North Koreans crying in the street, and even defectors say that was more real than fake, which is kind of amazing given that the country is really poor and 1% of its population lives in prison camps. And then one effect of this that works really well in the North Korean government's favor is that this militarism also distracts the US and the rest of the outside world. So we're so worried about their nuclear program and the crazy attacks on South Korea that we actually don't bother that much with the way they treat their own people who are the real victims of the North Korean system.
So 2 days ago, President Putin, he met South Korean new President Moon Jae-in in Vladivostok. I think President Putin, he gave a very well-reasoned analysis on the Korean Peninsula, and he says North Korea would rather eat grass than give up nuclear missile because they do not feel safe. He said on September 6th. And I'm going to go to the next slide, where two presidents met each other. Next slide.
Следующий слайд.
And then he said,
Путин сказал вчера, что военная истерия Соединенных Штатов по поводу Северной Кореи не решит ядерную проблему. Единственный вариант — это дипломатия в рамках международного права. И я абсолютно согласен с этим утверждением. И сейчас 3 минуты российского президента.
Самый простой вопрос за сегодняшний день.
You don't need translation, right?
Знаете, я с коллегами в приватном порядке разговаривал, но не считаю нужным здесь что-то скрывать. Повторю то, что и говорил в частных беседах, и в официальных. И, собственно, то, что должно быть у всех на слуху, и для любого здравомыслящего человека понятным должно быть. Вот смотрите, все хорошо помнят, что произошло с Ираком и Саддамом Хусейном. Хусейн отказался от производства оружия массового уничтожения. Тем не менее, под предлогом поиска этого оружия был уничтожен и сам Саддам Хусейн, и члены его семьи при соответствующей известной военной операции. Там даже дети погибли, внука, по-моему, его застрелили. Страна разрушена, и Саддам Хусейн повешен. Послушайте, но это же все знают, это все помнят. И в Северной Корее это хорошо знают и помнят. И вы думаете, что в силу принятия каких-то санкций Северная Корея откажется от того курса, который она взяла на создания оружия массового уничтожения. Россия осуждает эти упражнения со стороны Северной Кореи. Мы считаем, что они носят провокационный характер. Но забывать про то, что я только что сказал, применительно к Ираку, а затем и к Ливии, мы тоже не можем. И уж северокорейцы точно не забудут. А использование санкций любого рода в данном случае уже является бесполезным и неэффективным. Да, они, как я вчера сказал одному из своих коллег, траву будут есть, понимаете? Но не откажутся от этой программы, если не будут чувствовать себя в безопасности. А что может обеспечить безопасность? Восстановление международного права. Нужно вести дело к диалогу между всеми заинтересованными сторонами. Нужно, чтобы у всех участников этого процесса, в том числе у Северной Кореи, не было никаких соображений, которые были бы связаны с угрозой их уничтожения. А наоборот, чтобы все стороны конфликта встали на путь сотрудничества. В этих условиях и в этой ситуации нагнетание военной истерии совершенно бессмысленно. Это тупиковый путь абсолютно. А потом, ведь у Северной Кореи есть не только ракеты средней дальности, а мы убедились в том, что они есть. Есть не только ядерный заряд, а мы знаем, что он есть в руках Северной Кореи. Но там есть еще и дальнобойная артиллерия, и система залпового огня до 60 километров дальностью. Против этих систем оружия вообще бессмысленно применение противоракетной техники. Нет, в мире сегодня не существует средств противодействия дальнобойной артиллерии или системам залпового огня. А потом их разместить можно так, что их и найти-то практически невозможно. В этих условиях нагнетания военной истерии, оно до хорошего не доведет. Это все может привести к глобальной планетарной катастрофе и к огромному количеству человеческих жертв. Никакого другого пути, кроме мирного, дипломатического способа решения северокорейской ядерной.
Yes, so diplomacy is the only way. I totally agree with President Putin, and thank you for his very well reasoned. I think he's the only rational leader around this Northeast Asia. I think President Trump is pretty crazy. And then let me use it. This is gonna be my last couple of slides. I know I have 2 or 3 minutes more, right? And then former Soviet dissident Andrey Smirnov, who's used to be the assistant to Mikhail Sakharov, and he said there is a town hall square test. Can a person walk into the middle of the town square and express his or her views without fear of arrest, imprisonment, or physical harm? This is a test, which distinguishes between free society and fear society. And our organization, we believe USB, that little USB is it can be a window to the world, as our chairman, Mr. Kang, just testified about his experience 25 years ago. This is a couple of slides. I'm gonna fast forward. This is recorded by North Koreans.
하지만 북한은 정보 없는 암흑에서 살아가고 있습니다.
북한의 교육은 김일성과 김정일에 대한 우상화를 강조하기 때문에 외부 세계에 대한 정보는 없었습니다.
북한 정부는 외부 사회를 북한보다 못한 나라라고 교육을 합니다.
북한이 세상에서 가장 살기 좋은 나라라고 했지만 사는 게 너무 힘들고 자유가 없었습니다.
북한에서 태어나 교육을 받은 사람이라면 무조건 믿어야만 했습니다.
북한에서는 정보라는 단어를 들어본 기억이 없습니다.
다른 나라들의 생활 수준이 북한보다 나은 것은 알고 있었지만 정확히 알 수는 없었습니다.
친척분이 중국을 다녀온 후 이야기를 들었을 뿐 그 외에는 없습니다. 이야기의 대부분은 중국은 먹을 것이 많고 밤에도 나처럼 밝다고 했던 기억이 납니다.
외부에서 유입된 영상물을 접하기 전까지 외부의 세계에 대한 인식은 없었습니다. 계속해서 한국의 영화나 드라마를 보면서 조금씩 생각이 바뀌었습니다. 무엇이 진실인가? 라는 생각을 하기 시작했습니다. 정보를 통해 사람들이 외부에 대해서 알 수 있고 그것을 바탕으로 진실과 거짓에 대한 판단을 할 수 있습니다.
그런 정보를 북한은 철저히 차단하고 있습니다. 정보의 중요성은 사람의 권리를 주장할 수 있다고 생각합니다.
사람들로 하여금 생각을 할 수 있게 만든 것입니다.
정보라는 것에는 여러 가지 의미가 있겠지만 북한 사람들에게는 희망이라고 생각합니다. 그래서 정보가 무엇보다 중요합니다.
Last year, I know my time's up, but I have just one more slide, which is footage from inside of North Korea. Do I have time? Yeah. This is most recent footage what you're doing inside of North Korea.
This footage was secretly filmed by a North Korean citizen who, if discovered, could face the death penalty. He is smuggling Western and South Korean TV shows, documentaries, and websites into the country. Media that is illegal in North Korea. This is part of a plan to change how North Koreans see the outside world and their own government. A plan to break the regime from the inside.
I think we're okay, so this is what you're doing. Thank you for your time, and thank you for being patient with us. Thank you.
Okay, so we're in. Okay, welcome back. So that was fairly intense things that we heard then about North Korea and about the work of Peter Lee and Mr. Kang. We're going to go back in time now, back to the era of the exhibition, actually, Bone Music. And I've got three very special guests here who have come by our invitation, people who've really inspired or helped us in this project. I think you know one of them at least. And let's start off with art, rock journalist, provocateur, cultural critic, author, broadcaster. Anything else, Art, do you want to add in there? Look, Art, dictators, we heard it then. I mean, they like things... No. Hitler, Stalin, the North Korean dictators, they like things simple, don't they? But let me put something to you. 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, rock. It's not Solzhenitsyn, is it? It's not Pasternak. Why did briefly, if you could, just to introduce yourself. Why did the Soviet authorities resist that record?
Well, I still am surprised. I mean, I'm shocked. If I was them, I would promote rock and roll music and make Soviet youngsters dance to death. Стоп, я забыл. Мне надо по-русски говорить. Значит,
I forgot that I have to speak Russian.
Значит,
So I'm really surprised that the authorities resisted rock music. I guess it was an illness, a disease that started in the 20th century. It was called anti-Americanism, and it's quite developed all over the world. Just because some people hate everything American. It could be the language, it could be politics, ideology, music. Once it's American, it's rubbish. And I guess the same happened in the Soviet Union, if we speak about rock and roll. Instead of saying rock and roll is the music of oppressed Negroes, this is the music that was all about fighting against slavery. They used to say that this was ideologically harmful music. So I think it was a mistake.
Okay, thanks. Well, just hold that there. Maxim, so I would like to introduce Maxim Krichinsky. I'm very pleased that Maxim has come all the way from Toronto because he was one of the people who helped us most in the X-Ray Audio project by explaining something about this culture and also by introducing us to Rudolf Fuchs and those people in St. Petersburg. So thank you, Maxim. I appreciate that. Now, Maxim, I wanted to say this to you. Oops. Okay, I'll do it in English. Mishka, you naughty Misha. On my stove, I'm heating up some water. I'll burn your head, my friend, so you don't go seeing her to the grove and up the hill. Now, on these records, Max, Art's taught about American rock and roll and jazz. We understand from what Art said why the Soviet authorities would hate that. But on these records, too, is a lot of Russian music made by emigres or other people. Can you briefly explain why that was forbidden?
First of all, these songs were banned because they did not comply with ideology. They did not call people to march and to sing in chorus. You know, this resistance to the authorities has a very deep history. We always had these jokers that were playing different music instruments and criticized the authorities. So the revolution took place in 1917, and people that lived in the early 20th century thought a lot about the song because it was such a powerful weapon of propaganda. And the first record that was recorded in Tsarist time, it was with anthem God Save the King, the Tsar. So it was always, the song was always considered to be a tool of propaganda, and the Bolsheviks used this. For example, in the first Lenin speech and other leaders, they all knew about it. So, and it was not only a tool of propaganda. The power, the authorities tried to explain through the song different things because most of population were illiterate. For example, what was insurance, and the government understood the power of the song, and they used it just to explain certain things. There was also grassroots culture that resisted propaganda, and people could use songs to ridicule authorities. For example, we had Chastushka, 4 lines that was very relevant, and the authorities understood this, and the next generation of the political leaders, Khrushchev or Brezhnev, could understand the power of song. For example, let's take Brezhnev. He was growing up during 20s and 30s. He was writing poems, and he rephrased Severianin's poem. He wrote a song using Vorovsky's literature. So they understood this all very well, and they banned those songs. And for example, Stalin in the early 30s, for example, made people pay fine or would just send them in exile. So in the late 30s, they would be condemned to 5 years imprisonment, 10 years imprisonment, and then death penalty. A month ago, in Pskov region, a bard songwriter was condemned for extremism, so he had to escape to Finland. A song, being a small literary form, has a huge potential. We have seen what happens in the North Korea, and it's true, songs help people to fight against the regime.
Okay,
that's why the authorities are scared
Max,
of that.
and I would like to introduce Andrey Smirnov, collector, academic, historian, and researcher. And for the purposes of this, the author of the project Sound in Z, which is a big inspiration for me to read about the story of the early Soviet electronic experimenters. It seems to me that the music being made in the 1920s, electronic music made in 1920s in the Soviet Union, was far more adventurous and exciting than the music that was being made in Western Europe. But Andrey, please, could you explain for us who don't know about this story, just to briefly tell us what it is?
Well, just as a brief note, it's true, I'm working with archives, but I work with unofficial archives, their private archive, and the archive from the acoustic laboratory of Moscow Conservatory. So they are not part of official archives or at Moscow Conservatory. They could be some manuscripts by researchers or musicians that were considered to be extremely uninteresting during Soviet time. So there's a very interesting story that can be found through these archives, and it's very different from official story, from official history. You know how the official history was written. Take a Soviet encyclopedia, for example, and you can find the names that were considered to be appropriate by the authorities. For example, the culture that existed in the early 20s and in the 1910s were never included in the history. So this book, The Sound of Z, has maybe a very strange title, but I'm not going to elaborate on that. That was a result of exhibition that took place in 1910 in Paris, in Palais de Tokyo, and we have some archived material. So this is a story of experimentalism in Russia in the 1910s, 20s, 30s and 40s. But anyway, it's the first half of the 20th century was extremely interesting, highly intensive in terms of ideas. And the sound, because, you know, they have never been published, but I hope they will be at some point.
Thank you. So we're going to begin this conversation. Please interrupt each other and argue with Art especially. Well, Art, let's start again with you. I mean, you know, the Soviet Union, so advanced in so many ways. You know, look at space exploration, the military science, all that stuff, and the things that Andrey's talked about. So why so conservative when it came to music?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. If you remember the Soviet Union was a futuristic country. You know, it was always the country that was looking into the future. They always said, oh, we represent the future of humankind. Then they spoke about bright future, communism, new person, new society. And it was all very adventurous. And as a result, they had a cult of the youth. A young generation is the youth of the world. Communism has to be built by a young generation. The cult of researchers, of most idealistic research that you can think of. And at the same time, very poor, miserable, dumb cultural policy. Why was it like this? I don't know. I can't understand it really. The only thing that comes to my mind is, you know, this a matter of bad taste. So, I guess, you know, the leaders of the Soviet Union were these elderly guys that didn't really understand what happened in the world. They were never interested in culture. Ivazovsky paintings and Ostrovsky plays were the top of cultural phenomena, and the films like Maxim's Youth. I don't mean you. So, all this music, all these experiments, and this formalism were disgusting, and the government was disgusted with that. For example, rock and roll. You know, I was asked about rock and roll, and I said that was a mistake, and I truly believe so. You know, you could develop a great music of Soviet youth. We could say that, you know, we have to outrun America using rock music, through music. It would be such a positive, constructivist goal for Soviet youth. Unlike, you know, this labor, you know, useless labor like construction of Trans-Siberian Railway. That would be much more fun, but it didn't happen. And the first reason, as I said, was a bad taste, and the other reason was that the authorities always thought that it was the Westerners that were spying, that wanted to impose their thing on the Soviet people. So if we had to play music, we had to play balalaika, and then texts, you know, content. There are so many things to consider. But even some innocent poems by our songwriters and Andrey Makarevich were considered to be anti-Soviet. For example, Yevtushenko, Pasternak poetry could never be used in popular music, and as a result, we got sucked by this swamp. So there's nothing to remember.
But I mean, it got off to a very good beginning, didn't it? I mean, in the early 1920s, you know, during maybe Lenin's time, there was all this incredible atonal music, noise music, electronic experimentation. Why was there not a recognition that this was a way that the Soviet Union could be before the West?
Ну, собственно говоря,
Тем более, что Лев Сергеевич Термен показал свой инструмент, термин ВОКС, первый электронный инструмент вообще когда-либо.
They have to speak in the microphone. The first termin Vox was shown to Lenin in 1921. And Lenin said that Termin Vox would be much more powerful than film industry.
Okay, Andrey.
Okay.
Well, if we speak about Soviet culture and the history of Soviet culture, it's very difficult to generalize because there are certain time periods that are radically different from each other. And, there was an explosion of patriotism in a good sense. Because the country was moving towards the future and they were looking for the future in the 20s and 30s. But in the 30s, actually, it was quite the opposite. And then during Khrushchev thaw, again, an explosion of enthusiasm, but it was different. So, post-revolutionary period and the 20s in particular was a very special time. And actually, it's quite similar to the 90s, even though nothing happened during the 90s that was similar to the 20s, in my opinion. So what's similar between these time periods? I guess the distance between the government and the people was quite short. For example, a homeless person, Arseny Avramov, could ask Trotsky or Lunacharsky, he could ask them for money to make symphony production, and all the factories and plants could turn into music space, and this production was performed twice in Moscow, and he lived in Moscow in 1923. He was sleeping in a Café Pegas, so this was in 1920. And Termin Vox, it was an invention that came out suddenly. Nobody supported it, nobody funded that creation. Professor Yoffe supported many young physicists, and in 1921, a young guy made this invention, and Lenin supported that project, and that's why we have this history of electronic instruments and synthesizers, as we know, and all this happened in the 1920s. Maybe because the Soviet government hasn't yet established the rule. Gustev and other people were having discussions what kind of government, what kind of state they should develop. Vertically centralized state or different kind, or an anarchic state, but later the situation changed. In the 20s there was free entrepreneurship and new economic policy, NEP, so you could set up your own company because all these projects were supported. As to the early 30s, everything was banned. All independent organizations were forbidden. If you wanted to make money, you had to become a civil servant. So the distance between the society and the government increased a lot, and that's why official culture appeared and unofficial culture appeared, and this situation maintained for quite a long time. The tools changed, but I can't really say that this was a matter of bad taste. Why did we have these bans in the 1930s? Why avant-garde was banned? Solov was writing his music, excellent music, it was fine. But then at some point, suddenly socrealism, social realism came on stage. And this was the basis for government policies. I think it was not because people didn't like Masalov's music. It's just that in the in the 20s we didn't have a totalitarian state. It was a different kind of state. I don't know how we can define it. There was internal enemy, external enemy, a division between official and unofficial culture, and it looked like an artificial model just because these were the rules. They were fighting against formalism. And formalism was something that was supported in the 20s. And then speaking about the late 50s, formalism was no longer there. They spoke about other things, and again the distance between the community and the government reduced. Khrushchev attended exhibitions. He and the artists could paint their pieces. So official culture was always supported. How could you get there? I think it was Petakov that said in the 1930s, he was a party functionary. He said, if the party orders me to consider the black to be white, I will accept this. So if you stick to this rule, you will become a part of official culture. And otherwise, you will have to be part of underground. But I can't think about underground in the 1930s. Artists created avant-garde works in the 30s, but where are they? Rodchenko's paintings were used to block the windows. Then Kostaki tried to take away the paintings.
Was there something anti-sexual that's going on as well, Maxim? I mean, you talk in this essay about they resisted the passion of the gypsy songs, the pleasure. It wasn't just it wasn't just anti-formalist, was it? It was almost anti-pleasure. Is that right?
Абсолютно. Собственно, в годы НЭПа, да, вообще советская власть, она была, можно назвать это отчасти, может быть.
It's true. It can be called a matter of bad taste, but also I can say there is this duality. For example, Isabella Yurieva, a singer, wrote memoirs about the 1930s, and lots of different genres were forbidden. Gypsy romance, prison songs, and at this exhibition you have this list of vocal pieces that are allowed and that are banned, and the list was growing every year. So Isabella Yurieva, a famous singer, said that she was called to perform for Stalin to the Kremlin, and he saw Kozlov and other singers. So she didn't have much work at that time because her repertoire consists of only 200 songs, and so he could sing only a dozen of songs. So Kalinin came up to her and asked her, please don't sing Soviet songs, please. You can sing some gypsy songs and other things. And that was a fact. Brezhnev loved Vysotsky's songs. So, they had these double faces, the Soviet authority. And yes, they declared NEP, they opened restaurants and cafes, and this term appeared, beer stage, because people wanted to hear the music they liked at the restaurants, not the songs about agitation. So the authorities declared that kind of song anti-Soviet, and there was a lot of struggle against gypsy songs. There was a Russian Association of Proletarian Musicians that were using swearing words and that wrote about Boris Fomin, Yuri Hai, and this quotation: gypsy songs is the same as pornography in literature, and it doesn't call you to move into the bright future. So So the major thesis why they banned all the songs that were against communist ideology, because they were lyrical songs, they were personal songs, and during the war there was a huge demand for such kind of songs. You couldn't just march all the time. And you know, we have seen that the North Korean people were either singing in chorus or as big ensembles. You couldn't really find a soloist during Stalin's time. I could tell you more.
Magnus, we've got anti-sex, anti-pleasure, anti-formalism, anti-intellectual. It's in bad taste. I mean, is there any limit to what states will try and control? I mean, you know, why do they attempt to control cultures now? You know, does it really have an effect?
I would say I think so, but I will also claim that I like keeping that think so. I don't want to prove it in the sense that I don't want necessarily the causal relationship between like culture and then democratic society or good things or something. Like that might very well happen, and I think there's a good argument that it happens, but I think art in itself is important, first of all, and we make that argument all the time that we defend the art and then full stop. But of course, it's in the nature that people have this idea that it will also change societies. And I think taking it from the regimes or the government's perspectives, the people in power, what is so frightening is this artistic creativity is so hard to control. Like once you like creating a space program, your earlier question, right? There's kind of a process and a goal, and you move in the same direction. Artistic creativity is very hard to, like, if you set that loose, people will come up with something. You can't predict what it is. If you're the one in power, you have your dominant narrative of why you're in power, why this is the right way for the country or the state or the nation or whatever you define, or your church or whatever. Like, it's just a really scary thought for the people in power to give that free. The creativity is just really scary because, and this goes, and I'm no expert on Soviet history, so I'm generalizing from all kind of different repressive regimes currently, and less repressive. Like you see the same tendency in democratic countries. People want to create a dominant narrative. This is why I'm the best. This is why I'm in power. This is why you should vote for me. This is why we shouldn't have a vote. I'm just here. And there's, of course, all other arguments to be made against these people in power, like journalism and science and all that. But I think the arts is just the most scary part. The transformative effect is so hard to predict, so you don't really know where to stop it, you don't know where to start it. It's like, if I give this free, I don't know what is going to hit me, and I'm afraid of that, so it's easier to just ban it.
Well, Magnus mentioned voting, so let's have a vote. I mean, how many people here think that culture, musical culture, can change politics? You put your hand up if you think that's possible. So who thinks it can't change, that music and culture can't change politics? Minority. A minority, interesting. Okay, well, okay. Let's find out. I mean, to my, Russian friends, did music help bring about cultural change in the Soviet Union? Andrey, you've got something to say?
Just a very brief note.
Yes, I would love to make this short comment. We are speaking about music, but we should split between music and poetry, because music is one thing, poetry is another thing. Song combines those two things because it has a certain message. So in this sense, like I raised my hand because I don't think that music can influence. I meant abstract music, because if we speak about songs and poetry, it's a different kind of thing.
Well, okay, let's fast forward for now to perestroika, this times. I mean, I don't know, you tell me. I mean, did music, rock music, punk, did it help bring about the change in the Soviet Union? Have you got something to say about that, Art?
Of course I can tell you something about it. Why did I say that music and good song could affect policies, could change the world? Because I witnessed this process. I saw how it could be possible. For example, speaking about things that happened in the 60s, in the period between the 60s and 80s, you know, it was caused not only by oil prices drop, not only by the war in Afghanistan, it was caused by the fact that there was a great alienation between the young Soviet generation and elderly generation. And the young generation, the young Soviet people were brought up in the Soviet spirit. So, for example, for young people in the late 70s and early 80s, anti-government mood was a norm, because I didn't know anyone who believed in Komsomol. So the emotional image, music, song, and the Western style, and the spirit of freedom that could be felt from that music and songs, all that were the precursors of Soviet Union collapse. And you know, the Soviet Union collapsed, and nobody felt sorry about it. Like, you know, there's this line, they said farewell without feeling sad. Maybe it's we should blame Beatles or Machina Времени for that, or maybe Alla Pugacheva, let alone composer Artemiev that wrote music for Tarkovsky's films. And Tarkovsky's films were anti-Soviet films, and everybody perceived them as such. And the same happened in other places. I'm not going to mention how music changed the politics and life in the 60s and 70s. You know, if we didn't have music, if we didn't have culture, we wouldn't have many other things. We wouldn't have LGBT community. We wouldn't have a feminist movement and many other things. You know, official propaganda consider those things as decadence, but basically they only say that the world is changing.
But I'm going to come back to you on that, because there is something very important to us. But I want to ask Peter first. Peter, in terms of the music that is going into North Korea on USB sticks, what's interesting for me is this is pop music, pop films, pop culture. It's not necessarily high culture, is it? I assume that you do believe that music can bring about political change.
Of course, actually, as you just see at the beginning of my presentation, the North Korean people, I don't know why, but this kind of dictatorial, authoritarian government, they prefer some classic musics, with some kind of authority or some kind of orthodox music. For some reason, they think this kind of pop culture and pop music or pop movies or just popular movies kind of a bit dangerous to their kind of ruling or things like that. I think philosophically, I think those government in dictatorial states, they prefer. They have a tendency to believe that what they believe is the abstract truth. Because of that, they have a tendency not to allow some kind of subcultures like pop musics or just like commercial movies should not be allowed. For example, after our organization has been some smuggling USBs which contains a lot of South Korean commercial movie or commercial television drama, which deals with everyday lives of South Korean, love stories, things like that. after having stand up 10 years, North Korean broadcasting systems or movie makers, they stopped producing their own because nowadays this kind of South Korean soap opera and commercial movie is so popular in the North Korea. Suddenly the government state-owned movie makers in the North Korea, they realized they cannot compete with this kind of mass influx of South Korean pop cultures. I personally do believe that by seeing this kind of South Korean or American or Western movies and pop songs, I guess North Korean peoples, they have kind of developed some kind of notions. There's other kind of alternative lifestyles besides from state-sponsored or state-authorized lifestyles.
Thank you. Yeah. So, I mean, Magnus, what about in the repressive regimes of, you mentioned Iran, you mentioned some Islamic states where music is forbidden. I mean, do you think that music could bring about change in those places? Or culture?
Yeah, and maybe to the point about like music without any textures. Music. No, yeah, but I would argue even that, taking that point, this prominent improvised music, like saxophonist, young woman I talked to on a stage a couple of months ago, like playing mostly to Western audiences. Like she's Norwegian. She's playing here in Moscow in a couple of weeks. We'll come by the exhibition, by the way. And she said, I asked her, why did she do it? And she said, if I just have one audience member where I could push their boundaries, right? Improvised music on a saxophone. Many people would say it's noise, right? It's really, like, she's really progressive. And she said, I just want to push one person's boundaries. And I can see from an authoritarian regime or like Islamic State, like pushing people's boundaries is just not something you want. If you then add text and political messages and the whole like connecting with so many people that musicians on stages can in like an emotional, intuitive way that you can't do through journalism or more like political speeches, then I definitely would say yes. And that's part of the reason. There's also like at least religious argument for banning it, but I think primarily it's because people are scared or like people in power are scared.
Just to go back to your point, so setting aside repressive regimes like North Korea and Iran, do you think music now in Russia, in the UK, in America has got any power to change minds and ideology, or is that time done?
И что-то менять. I think the golden era of music is behind. Music has been very lucky because it was on the front edge of cultural life in the 60s, 70s, even 90s. But now it's somewhere on a backstage. I don't think it can influence much. We should have this movement that has to be generated from both sides. On the one hand, musicians have to generate some powerful thing, but we haven't really heard anything like that in Russia since the 80s, and we haven't heard anything like that in the West as well. There aren't any convincing great talents that can ignite the new generation. On the other hand, I don't see any passion among the young generation that used to be there, that the young generation of the past used to have. So there's this apathy, and I doubt that it would spark anything.
I'm going to have another vote here. I mean, of people here, who thinks, I'm talking about now in our countries and rather than in North Korea or repressive regime, but who thinks here that music means less or matters less now than it used to? Who doesn't? Who thinks it means the same or right? I'm glad you said that, David Constantine. Right, good. Okay, so Andrey, to you. Can cultural restriction, censorship, ever have a positive effect?
Well, it's quite a difficult question because, it's again about racism, fascism. Yeah, I mean, if well, it's a continuous like. Я завел по-английски, да? Извиняюсь. Не заметил.
Sorry that I switched to English. It's a very complicated question. For example, if somebody promotes their ideas in music in texts, actually, the ideas of Nazi or fascism, should we fight against it or not? It's a very complicated question. I don't have an answer. I'd love to fight against it. But on the other hand, maybe everything should be done in a different way. You know, if you have to reach a certain point when where such messages spread, get branches, develop further, then it means that it will be too late to change anything in this situation. So you'll probably have to look for more radical methods. But I think it's more important to use some preventive measures and to heal and cure it beforehand. Well, you know, the legal system should be transparent, the criticism should be transparent, and transparent motives of critics, just to make sure the situation is open. You shouldn't ban anything. We should just maintain a very open dialogue. And we shouldn't use any administrative resource to ban something and to give way to others, because it never works. But you know, we have authoritarian regimes, so that's why we have this division between official and unofficial art. Actually, the example of Kirill Serebrennikov.
So hold that, please.
Okay,
yeah, we're going to come back to that. Maxim, did it ever work in the Soviet Union? All that effort, all that energy into censorship and cultural censorship and restriction of music, did it have any positive effects, do you think?
For listeners, it could have a positive effect because, you know, arts councils filtered certain kind of people, because now, even speaking about top stars, can be hardly compared to the secondary artists during Soviet time, because what do we see now on stage? You know, restaurant performers that we see on TV screen. Maybe it had a certain effect for the audience because they could have a high quality product. So only professionals performed on the stage. My colleague said that censorship had to ban some extremist songs, but I think that the songs with extremist content can never be called songs. They are just part of propaganda, like leaflets. They are either generated during war time or Cold War time, so they can never be called songs. So that's my opinion. I'd love to play the role of devil's advocate. I'd love to sing an ode to censorship and bans, because I think that the censorship and the bans for low and high culture are very useful and are necessary. Why did we have such fantastic drive in music field in the 20th century? Because the music was forbidden, and at some point it was forbidden in America as well. And in America it was forbidden because of racial discrimination, because of religious views. They didn't show Elvis Presley, and in this country country it was forbidden due to ideological reasons. And this made music extremely appealing. Just think about it. You know, we can't even speak about it now. In the Soviet Union, back in the 70s, the new record, like new Pink Floyd record or new Led Zeppelin record, cost 60 to 70 rubles, whereas the average salary in the Soviet Union was 125 rubles. I was a junior research associate. My salary was 115 rubles. Talking Heads record cost 60 rubles, more than half of my monthly salary. And I never thought I would just buy a record if I needed it. I could change it later. Can you imagine something like that happening now? For example, now the average salary would be about 1,000 euro, no, less, 600 euro a month. Can you imagine that you would be full of enthusiasm when you pay 300 euro for a new record? It's unimaginable. So it was only because we had those bans, because the music was tabooed, that's why it was so popular. What do we have now? Music is accessible, it's available like water, like air, like dirt. It's mobile. You can find it anywhere, you can get it out of thin air. It's very compact. You don't have to have big record players. You can use your phone, you can use other devices to listen to music. And that's it. So it means that music is not valued anymore. You can hear it on the metro. You can listen to it everywhere. So that's the destiny. That's the music, that the lot that the music has. So that's why I'm all for censorship and for the bans. I would like to retort, but it's not about censorship. You probably understand that I'm quite far from song culture. That's why I'm trying to shift towards music. That's why I divide between music and text. So if music can influence the evolution of society, or the state collapse. You know, state collapse not because of music. We know why the Soviet Union collapsed. It was not because of music. But how could music help that? For example, in the 80s or early, you know, during Soviet time, the late 70s and 80s, I was living in the big hall of conservatory, and we had much more concerts of avant-garde music, Schnittke's premieres, Gennady Rojdestvenskiy was a conductor. Lots of interesting things happened. And I remember that emotional atmosphere. We would go to attend the concert not because of music. We were part of the same community. So it's again about this division. You know, there are different tiers, and in the bottom part, very powerful culture can develop, and music helps there. For example, it wasn't music that destroyed the Soviet Union, but you know, in August in 1991, millions came out to the street because of music. Also, not necessarily just music, could be artists, exhibitions, and other things.
Yeah, and maybe to Art's point about censorship, of course, as a human rights organization, we don't really look at the quality of the art, right? We, like, of course we do as private individuals at the end of the day when we go home and enjoy a great piece of music or something. But in our daily work, what we look at is the right to artistic freedom, right? We don't distinguish if it's good or it's bad, it's high class, it's low class. We look at the right, and I think to Art's example of how it was more treasured historically, part of that story is also it was excluding a lot of people. There's a lot of people that didn't have the ability to listen. And in our definition and understanding of artistic freedom or the right to artistic freedom, one thing is, of course, the artist, and I talk a lot about the musicians in prison and so on, but an equally important, and if not the most important part, is that it's everyone's right to artistic freedom. It's you, me, it's all of us. We have, under international law, the right to experience this, to go into a museum, to go to a concert hall. So when you put restrictions, it's not only limiting the artists that may become more creative or something, and of course I love some of the great music that have come out of that, but it's all of us that are robbed from that right and engaging and participating, and I think that's just a distinction I wanted to make.
Thank you, yeah. Well, let's have another vote. So who believes that music should be forbidden for some reason? For example, because it contains homophobic lyrics, like some rappers, or it has lyrics which are inciting violence against race, or perhaps, just as Art said, because it's terrible music. I mean, who thinks that there are situations when music should be forbidden? Peter, please tell us.
Well, actually, when I was in college in South Korea back in the 80s, it was still at the end of the Cold War. I still remember in 1980 at the Olympic Games, which was held in Soviet Union. So our nation, South Korean, we vetoed, we didn't participate because we strongly believed we belonged to the western part of the world. In 1984, I guess the Olympic Games, in this time, vice versa, it was held in Los Angeles in the United States. In this time, the Eastern Bloc, they vetoed and they didn't participate. And 1988, Olympic Games was finally held in the Seoul, South Korea. Then everybody comes in, so we were so surprised. So we vetoed, we didn't go, but these people actually came in. And then still back in 80s, there was a strong government censorship even in the South Korea, forbidding all those musics originating from, at that time, the communist blocs, like Mr. Kang mentioned, like Millions of Roses of Russian music. That's very beautiful music. But all those censorship even kind of contributed to more the state censors those artistic forms of music, the more people are hungry for kind of consuming that kind of banned musics. So I don't think there's any value even for the states. The more they try to restrict those artistic forms of music or a movie, people the more they're gonna pursue it. This is actually what is happening in the North Korea, because government is kind of strictly restricting South Korean popular songs. But every young generations of North Korea, they do sing. Whenever they do sing the South Korean music, whenever they have secluded places, they get together and then they share their subcultures of South Korean music. Eventually, it's gonna be more dangerous to the restrictive government by kind of blindly kind of try to stop or restricting those subcultures. It has no value.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, personally, we're talking kind of about recorded music, but of course, live music, has an amazingly transformative effect. It can do, right? It's like a religious experience, it can be. We're running out of time, so I wanted to quickly go through our participants here and say, what does the arrest of Kirill Srebrenikov, so I apologize for the pronunciation, what does that say about cultural freedom in Russia right now? Do you want to start off, Peter?
Well, I don't think I have enough knowledge about the cultural freedom in Russia, but this is actually my first time to be in Russia, and thank you, Stephen and Nastia and Dasha, all those help from the Garage Museum. But actually, what I was surprised at, I was so impressed by the Russian people's citizens of Moscow, your kind of a deep understanding about the culture, your eagerness to embrace other cultures, even try to listen to what is happening those most secluded countries like North Korea. But back in '80s when I was in college, I was even when I was a little one, we are educated that we are kind of made to draw some kind of paintings, and then paintings and anti-communism kind of paintings in the schools. And we thought very ridiculously. I thought when I was a little kid, those communist people might have horns. So this is some kind of what a comedy. Like we're all the same human beings. Those bannings of cultures, those banning, even kind of government try to stop people's understanding each other. It will create some kind of monstrous kind of images toward each other. So it's gonna escalate that kind of hostility out of nothing. So I'm not in the position. I'm not an expert in the cultures in Russia. But if there is any kind of that kind of state censorship or restrictions on some kind of cultures, I think it will not help the government at the end of the day, because at the end of the day, people will realize it's not true, and then at the end of the day, people will realize the government actually kind of deceived them.
Thank you, Andrey.
Ну, собственно, по мне, так вот, как я уже вот пытался начать это говорить.
I liked Andrey Arkhangelsky article where he analyzes Kirill Serebrenikov's situation from official and unofficial culture point of view. I see it very simple. You know, during all times, except for 20s and 90s, there was always this division supported by the state, you know, because the state always planned everything. They explained what you could do, what you couldn't do, but it doesn't mean that they were not involved with things that were wrong. In their opinion. And in the 90s, this boundary between official and unofficial culture erased and disappeared. Then it was recovered in the 90s. And again, you know, we had this culture of the loyal, and if you don't fit it, it means that you belong to a different culture. In the 40s and the 70s, this gap between two cultures was based on ideology. And now ideology doesn't work. It just it's based on sacralization of state funding, according to Arkhangelsky, the author of the article. During all time in the Soviet Union, if you wanted to do something not supported by the Soviet government, you had to break the law. For example, if I wanted to create a synthesizer, it means I had to steal the details or components from the enterprise. I had to buy some components from the black market. I had to sell my synthesizer. So I was a criminal according to the Soviet law, and some people went to prison because of that. For example, there was a great master that produced guitars, and Lev sold his Termin Vox. So at the moment, any curator or any director of the festival know that they are to blame, just by definition, you know, because they use cash and you can't organize a festival without that. So festivals, conferences can never take place without violating the law. I could be put to prison. Anybody could. I don't want to point fingers. And Serebrennikov turned out to be a bright figure that could be used to demonstrate that time changed, and again there's a clear division between different kinds of culture, and it's not directly related, to this situation. You can create all kinds of cultural things, but you shouldn't use government money for that. Well, speaking about my opinion about the story happened to Kirill Serebrennikov, when I praised the censorship and bans, I didn't mean that you can put people to prison. For example, if they just banned Serebrennikov's play like Tangazer or Jesus Superstar, it would be okay. Maybe people would organize pickets around the theater. Maybe they would put Jesus Christ in some swamp area, and something interesting would come out of it. But it's not good to put artists to prison. That's what happens in Iran and in Russia. That's my first point. Then the second point, I completely agree with Andrey, and the thing that happened to Serebrennikov shows that we are on the same at the same place. We follow the same spiral. For example, it's like 1948, 1949, fighting against cosmopolitanism, and then homosexualism, Russophobia. You know it much better than me. It's very sad. One thing is when censorship inspires you, and another thing is when a ban scares you and nothing else. And I think that's what the government is trying to do. The government is trying to scare people by putting people to prison. It's not cat and mouse play that we played in the 70s and 80s. Everybody played this game, Tarkovsky and Taganka Theater, underground rock musicians, and it was great. It was inspiring. And we were in a very great mood. But now we feel hopelessness and fear, and that's why I feel sad. I agree with my colleagues. Kirill Serebrennikov became a victim of today's politics. No matter how what you think about him, maybe it's questionable, his art, but anyway, whenever you create some art, it's always questionable. You can't use the same measure. If you perceive artists, and for example, Alexander Novikov is under investigation, and there are some financial manipulations involved. For example, Artem mentioned 1948, 1949, whereas I think it reminds me of a different time when the Soviet government put Parajanov to prison. So they use this weird wrong mirror because it's not for good. It's a scary thing.
It's of course, as I mentioned in my presentation, we're concerned, and I maybe want to take it at different levels, maybe three. First of all, that we see an amazing arts and culture scene in Russia, and I don't want to underestimate that. We as a human rights organization always focus on the negative, where are people censored, where are they imprisoned, but there's a lot of good things coming out of Russia as an outsider, and of course don't know the case that well. I am an outsider seeing this, But what we often do in the human rights world is look at trends. Is it getting better? Like or is it getting worse? Right? And here in Russia, there's a constitution guaranteeing the right to artistic freedom, like freedom of expression. Russia signed the key international conventions guaranteeing this. So like the paperwork is there. But then maybe with this specific case, a lot of detail we could discuss, but I think it sends a message, no matter what the facts of the case is. It sends a chilling message to the artistic community that I'm concerned about. And then this whole discussion, maybe on a funding level, is something that is also like borderline international law. How do you, as a state, fund the arts? It's a tricky question, but the Special Rapporteur on Cultural Rights have a fairly good report on it. And at least you got to set up criteria that are transparent and secures that you don't discriminate. It needs to be a neutral system, right? And you can question, is it a neutral system? Maybe. I'm not saying anything about the individual cases, but does artists in Russia feel this is a neutral system no matter what my art piece says? Will I get funding or not? That's one question. And then I think the big one is the legal, and where I really see the worrying trend, like at a legal level, some of these laws, 2012, that it became a criminal offense to insult the religious feelings or religious beliefs, right? And the anti-LGBT propaganda laws obviously can affect artistic expression, and like the anti-NGO, like foreign agent kind of law. These initiatives, from a human rights perspective and as an outsider, of course, makes us concerned about the direction that we're heading in.
Thank you, Magnus. So what about you? I mean, what do people here think about that case? Anybody please give us an opinion or challenge what's been said or ask any questions that you like. I've got a question. You need to speak into the mic just so that we can hear the translation. Thanks.
Thank you very much for this great discussion. My question is for Peter Lee. There was a genius fragment in your presentation, Kim Chen-in and missile, phallic, symbol. I guess in Soviet and Russian culture, people would compose lots of couplets that Kim Chen-il is the main man among these women around him. So, is there such kind of counter-sexual reflection around the leader and his fantasies who want to inseminate the whole world? Have you ever heard something like that? Maybe there were some jokes about it.
Did you understand the question?
I don't know. I actually understand the question. Is there any kind of sexual impulse on the part of Kim Jong-un to kind of threatening out the world? Is that your question? No.
I'm not sure, actually.
Okay. Can you repeat the question?
I like the sound of it, but I don't know what you're saying.
Yeah, okay.
Could you explain again a little?
Last part of the question. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Хорошо. Рефлексируют ли
Do people reflect about Kim Chen-il as a monster, as a man, as a male monster, in songs, in some folk music, in South Korea or outside of it? Maybe dissidents or defectors, because people in Russia would reflect about it, definitely, immediately.
Okay, yes, of course, all the peoples outside North Korea, they have a tendency to believe Kim Jong-un, the third generation of Kim dynasty, is kind of a monstrous figure and kind of a little crazy. But personally, I don't think he's crazy. I think he's kind of too selfish, extremely selfish. So he doesn't even care to sacrifice all of his people. And then threaten. He even doesn't kind of want to kind of save any energy not to kind of threaten the world. All those missile launching and nuclear tests is kind of a very cold-blooded. It's based on very cold-blooded calculations of how can he kind of maintain his power, because North Korea is internally kind of crumbling. It's imploding.
Peter, I think also I think I understand the question was also asking, outside North Korea, perhaps in South Korea, do people write songs or make work about make jokes? Does he appear in songs as a monstrous figure?
Of course, there's of course. Yes, of course. I personally believe he has a very strong sexual impulse because, of course, he's kind of a stamina and things like that, driving crazy, developing all those missiles and nukes, and then he tried to show that he's only 32 years old. He tried to show the world, I'm the man in the church. So if you look into the YouTube, there's so many kind of graphics and videos and even cartoons of describing Kim Jong-un as a monstrous figure, which is kind of surreal. But behind of it, I personally believe that he's a very cold-blooded man and calculating. He even killed his half-brothers by nerve gas. He killed his.
Peter, I'm gonna stop there just because we're running so short on time. Thank you for that. So,
my question is for Steven about psychological duality that I have seen in this exhibition. The Soviet system repressed freedom of expression and creative process. No question about it. No doubt about it. And I feel very negative about all those prohibitions and the bans. But due to those bans, it was due to those bans that we have this exhibition, because people created those recorders. They could record music. So do you feel this kind of psychological paradox, and maybe you admire that Soviet system because it resulted in this special phenomenon. Otherwise, we wouldn't have it.
Right, I'm going to be very quick. I think there are an awful lot of things. Many things happened culturally in the Soviet Union that were amazing, and in the West, in the UK, we didn't hear about them. So the Iron Curtain worked in both directions. There was amazing music made. There was, this is official music. There's amazing films made that were not censored, amazing art. So for sure, the Soviet Union was a very cultural place. This particular story is inspiring to me, partly because the records are beautiful, but because of the people who made them. And this is a story of human ingenuity, of human endeavor, and it's a story about how much music can matter. So this story, paradoxically, this story for me was an inspirational story, yeah. Thanks you for that. I've got, are we still here for this question? Yeah.
My question is for Maxim Krichinsky and Andrey Smirnov. We have seen a Radio Front magazine, and back in the 1936, they gave instructions how to create a recorder to a radio lover. For example, how did you register it if you created such a recorder? And when outlaw recordings appeared, did people go to jail for outlaw recordings? For example, phonographs in the 20s, or maybe even precursors. I'm interested in recorders. Radio France, 1936. Why did they, give these recipes, these instructions? You couldn't manufacture those recorders at that time. It was a big revelation for me to see this magazine that was published in 1936. Stephen dug out that the first bone recordings appeared not in Russia but in Hungary in 1936, and you asked me if people went in jail. No, before the war, no, I don't know anything about this. People went to jail for speculating, for manipulating with prices, but only Alexander Galich songs, were the reason for people to go to jail. And irrespective of that, still you could hear his songs.
Very quick, Andrey. Okay, super quick.
I was looking through all the Radio Front magazines during the 30s, and I can tell you that, again, from the division point of view, I mean, official and unofficial culture, the culture of inventors who could create something in the 20s and get support, institutional support, they moved to a different area that was called radio amateurs or do-it-yourself activities. It's an underdiscovered area, understudied, because there are many interesting things, and it's true, this magazine published different information about different recorders, and no registration was required.
Andrey, thank you so much. Thank you. We've run out of time, I'm afraid. Is that right, Nastya? We're done? No last questions? Thank you so much for coming, actually. And for me personally, it's the last live event in this bone music exhibition, and it's been a very moving, inspirational thing for me to be in Russia, to be invited to come to Russia to do this project. I really appreciate it, and I wanted to say thanks to Cardboardia, my production partners. I wanted to say thank you to Garage, to Katya and to Nastya for doing all this, putting it all together. It's been extraordinary. Asya's not here, actually, but I wanted to say thank you to her, too. And I think we should say, in turn, thank you to our participants. Would you please give a round of applause to Mr. Peter Lee, who came from South Korea. And to Andrey Smirnov, and if you don't know Andrey's project, Send in Z, it's extraordinary, so thank you, Andrey. And I suppose I better say thanks to Art. Art, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Art's book, Subkultura, is about to be published in the UK and here too. An absolutely amazing survey of Soviet youth culture, and he's been very supportive of me personally. I really appreciate it. Shall we say thanks to Artem Trotsky? And as I said at the beginning, I wouldn't have really got going with this project without the help of Maxim Krichinsky. I really, really appreciate that, Max. Thank you for coming as well. And Magnus, thanks for coming from Berlin to do this, and thanks for your work, which is extraordinary. Magnus Ag.
Stephen Code.
Oh. That's it, we're done.